Birsa Munda realized that the process of land moving from tribals to non-tribals has really been going very fast, and what do you call that? What he introduced the term in the sense that Mundas that talk about the Deku. Deku basically means the exploiters. So it basically meant traders, landlords, money lenders combined together, in fact, as to how they were appropriating the land. And therefore, only way in which one can really save what do you call its own country, Abu Adisum, what is called Abu Adisum and Abu Raj, means our country and our Raj. That's what. And I think even as a student, sometimes I feel that if we just read a little bit about him, his biography, I think there's a lot of space for us to see as to how we really try to understand him, and is there a possibility of what he went through in his life at his early phase, can we really, in a sense, really, internalize those kind of ideas? One of the things I felt is that he was a very, extremely empathic person, very sensitive person. He lived in the hills, and I don't think the British colonial laws and legislations or institutional arrangements that they had really impacted the region that he lived as intensely as the plain regions of, let's say, of the area. And it is in the plains that you will find that there were the transfer of movement of, in the sense that you can start with the permanent zamindari settlement, which basically conferred the right of ownership on the zamindars, the landlords, the revenue collectors. So what do we call the stroke of pen? In fact, the whole legal structure was completely changed. And people who were owners of the land eventually became tenants of the landlords. And that has a far-reaching implications. And you find that this process of, particularly if you look at the Chota Nagpur area, I was originally from Chota Nagpur, but I am brought up in West Bengal. Again, I was a part of the colonial system and colonial policy. We got uprooted and worked as a plantation labor in North Bengal. So I'm brought up there. But I've been keen on observing the Jharkhand area, and you will find that almost from the 18th century, there was a lot of movement of the people from the plains into the tribal areas for trade, the commerce. Then there were plenty of land, and therefore there was shortage of land in the plains, so the land-hungry peasants were really moving into it. But the colonial period, coming of the colonial period, and particularly, as I said, that the opening of the tribal areas into less roads, communication, it really opened it up. And therefore large-scale migrations of the people from the plains to the tribal areas, and then reinforced by the land and revenue settlement of what is called 1793, if I'm not mistaken, the permanent zamindari settlement. It's a far-reaching implications. So that's one. And therefore what you really find is the land and forest on which tribals are very heavily dependent on for their life, the culture, their identity, is something which becomes slightly started moving from the tribals to non-tribals. And that was what, and that began quite early. Birsa Munda comes much later, but if you look at the history, it almost starts immediately after the 1793 or 1765 onwards. You go to Tilkamaji, you go to Santhal Revolt of 1855, or you go to Agrarian Revolt of 1809, 10. You go to Bhumij Revolt, you go to Colt Revolt of 1931, giving rise to Wilkinson rules and so on. So I think it's very important for us to understand the history, and it is in that context that one has to place Birsa Munda. Birsa Munda realized that the process of land moving from tribals to non-tribals has really been going very fast, and what do you call that? What he introduced the term in the sense that Mundas that talk about the Deku. Deku basically means the exploiters. So it basically meant traders, landlords, money lenders combined together, in fact, as to how they are appropriating the land. And therefore, only way in which one can really save what we call its own country, Abhuadisum, what is called Abhuadisum and Abhuaraj, means our country and our Raj. That's what he said. That's in the sense of my country. He has an idea of a country that this is our land, our territory. And this is a territory where we should be our Raj. We should really rule it, as we have been probably, let's say, traditional ruling it. But the problem is that the Raj has really moved into the hands of someone else. And therefore you find that, I think, in order to understand the period, one has to look at the colonialism. Personally, I make a distinction of colonialism and colonization. Of course, colonialism, it's also colonization. But it's more of a legal, administrative, and what is called the framework in terms of which how we could really appropriate the resources for, let's say, use elsewhere in the other parts of the world. But then there was also a movement of the people. There was colonization that was really going on. And this structure of colonialism and colonization, the people were really moving and colonizing the territory. These are two dimensions that were there. And these dimensions, which Birsa Munda in fact tried to address it, and through his movement tried to dislocate it or throw it out, but that continues even today. I don't think tribals in India, particularly in the peninsular India, they're outside of, let's say, may not be colonialism, but surely there is a colonization process up there, and it has gone on, probably much more aggravated in the post-independent India. Look at it in terms of the development projects that really came up. Who benefited out of the development projects? Whether you go to Jharkhand areas, whether you go to Jamshedpur, Bokaro, Ranchi, you just find it out, you go all these towns, how many people are there tribals into Bokaro or in Jamshedpur, in Ranchi? Who this really came? Who really benefits? So even when you really moved, let's say, post-independent India, the process which were at work has not really undergone change. Yes, there was one change in the sense that post-colonial India tried to give us something which the colonialists did not do it. British colonialism did not do it. They always wanted to take everything. And at best, when they knew that they were facing a law and order problem, that is when they introduced all this non-regulated system, agencies, scheduled areas, what is called the excluded areas, partially excluded areas, where they're trying to restrain the people from the plains not to go to this area. So that was not so out of love. It was out of the strategy of maintaining the law and order. So what you really find that the British did not give anything other than that. On the contrary, you find post-independent India continued the colonial structure, but they also gave something in return. And what did they give in return? They gave in return that, well, in the sense of representations and in building an inclusive Indian society, and therefore we were given representations in terms of reservations in the parliament, in state legislature, in state employment, in higher education institutions. That's one. The other is, of course, a lot of affirmative action programs, socio-economic development, etc., etc. So that's, but then you find that the crux of what the colonial structure has continued, in the sense appropriating the land and the forest and other resources, has not come to halt in the post-independent India. So what you really find is that there is two kind of processes there. So one is that you are giving something, but you are also taking something. So it's not something pure giving. So in the case of the Adivasis, particularly Peninsular India, it is not only giving, you are also taking. So you are giving us, yes, in what's called affirmative action program, state employment, higher educational representation, but in the process you are also controlling something, either the land, forest, or other resources, and that has constantly moved away from the tribals to non-registered tribal, or the state acquisition of land, and also moved from the tribals to non-tribal. That process has not come to halt. So how do we really explain this? Therefore, whatever benefit that is really coming out of affirmative action is in a sense countered, in a way adversely impacted to the fact that you are taking away the land and forest. I believe it is not affirmative action program at all. It is more of an unequal exchange between two different groups of people. It is an exchange that in return for what we are giving you in terms of affirmative action program, we are taking away your land, the forest, and other kinds of resources. So it's not this unequal exchange. So when people say, well, Dalits and Adivasis are pumping or squeezing the exchequer, is it really they're squeezing the exchequer? Because they're not paying income tax, they say, well, we are, look at the way amount of land that probably there has been much more growth for India, but taking away the land and resources of the tribals than what tribals have actually got it. So their contributions to the national exchequer probably is much higher than what they have really got it. So you cannot just look at in terms of relationships. There is this kind of relationship. The legal structure is something has been most devastating as far as the tribals in the peninsular India is concerned. All these are product of the legal structure. This was during colonial period, and this has continued, this legal structure. It's a Land Acquisition Act. So Land Acquisition Act, yes, you can acquire it. But what is the purpose of then you have the restrictions on the alienation of land from tribals to tribals? All states, whether you go to Jharkhand, whether you go to Odisha, or you go to Andhra Pradesh, all states have enacted a law which says that land cannot really be transferred from tribals to tribals. What is going on? So how do you look at these acts? How do you look at the legislations? So you have Land Acquisition Act, of course, is more important, is eminent domain. So how do we really therefore locate this whole legal structure that are there? There are protective regime, protective laws. At the same time, there are laws which tries to take away. How do we balance these kind of laws? How, as students, how do we really look at it? What difference does it really mean? In the sense that are the laws all of the same parity or the same level or the same what's called the weightage, or you find there are some laws which are more important, has greater weightage than the other laws, and therefore you find that Land Acquisition Act has a much greater weightage than the Land Act which says that we will restrict the alienation of land from tribals to tribals, or you say Land Acquisition Act, let's say earlier 1894, forget about the 2013. So that's the kind of the problem in which we are. I think there is for us a lot of things to need to problematize as to the state in which we are. Now, one point where you find that if you really look at the overall, it is the heart of India, which is really is the pool of poverty, illiteracy, and malnutrition, and whatever you to talk about it. That's the heart of India. You talk about, and what is the heart of India is the 5th schedule areas. Despite the fact that there is what is called, we boast about the 5th schedule provisions. What is 5th schedule provisions? It basically says that it's basically a colonial lineage. In the case of the Northeast, there was an intervention. There was an innovations of giving the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution, which is not at all there in the colonial structure. So in case of Northeast, you can make an innovation. But in the case of peninsular India, you did not make an innovation. Rather, you continued the colonial structure. The lineage of the colonial structure continued. So where is the autonomy then? Where is Abwa Disum and Abwa Raj? Abwa Disum and Abwa Raj you can find in the Northeast, in the sense because the 6th schedule they gave you a legislative, executive and judicial power over the territory in which you are living. It's a different matter that they had a problem and then eventually it got elevated into the states, let's say around the 70s. What really happened in the north, in the peninsular India? Peninsular India continued in the sense the 5th schedule of the Indian Constitution basically saying the governor is your custodian. It's a paternalism. The governor is supposed to see that any law passed by the parliament or state legislature, whether it is in the interest or not in the interest of tribal communities. But he saw that all the laws passed by the parliament or state legislature in the last 75 years, he did not find anything bad about it. And they kept on extending it. As a result of all these laws were extended to tribal areas, and therefore they became more important. And naturally, therefore, the laws which have been extended, naturally it has a far-reaching implications and consequences in the tribal communities. So how do you, in the sense, therefore, you find that two things are constantly going on in the peninsular India. One is dispossession, alienation of land, throwing away from the forest because you're bringing more and more forests under reserved, protectors, wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, and therefore the people who were already living now, what they become the infiltrated, the illegal occupants. That's the kind of things is happening in the whole of this. So you find that they have become illegal occupants, they are infiltrators. Just because you brought a law imposed on them, and for the people who were already traditionally enjoying that kind of rights, they become illegal, and therefore they have to be thrown. This is what has happened. And that is where, so you find that on 2000, 2004, you find in the whole of the India and the forests, you find there police were there burning the crops, burning the houses, evicting the people, violence against them. This all happened. It is at that background that tribal social organizations and the activists, what is called lawyers, retired bureaucrats, they came together and therefore they talked about the Forest Rights Act. That was the context in which it. But the Forest Rights Act also doesn't work as effectively as it should. PESA is there, which again was a part of the mobilization of the movement. It doesn't work as effectively as it should. So how do we really understand this? But the law which wants to take away the land, that works very well. That works very well. So that's the kind of situations, and I think therefore the much of the problems that we really see in peninsular India is the lack of the self-determined development, in the sense that people don't have power. They don't determine their own life. Whether you talk of development, whether you talk of education, whether you talk of health, whether you talk of culture, we are being determined by someone else. And that actually is the bane of the tribal problems in the peninsular India. I think these are, so when we really talking about Birsa Munda and what he really thought about it and what he really captured, what the kind of problems, I think that problem still remains very much intact today. And as a students and universities, I think it is important for us to really reflect. So what you will find is that, therefore, I think very important for us to really focus on the legal and constitutional structure. I believe that there can be one single policy for the tribals. All the people talk about tribal policy. I don't believe it. When you find that constitutional provisions are itself so different, how could there be one policy? Northeast constitutional structure is very different than the constitutional structure which we have been given the fifth schedule. Sixth schedule is different, fifth schedule is different, and there's a large chunk of people who are even outside the fifth and the sixth schedule. So how do you really make one single policy? When the constitutional legal structure itself is different, you can't think of one single policy. Then you have to really think of the policies. That's the kind of the context in which we are. And therefore you find that I think when you're looking at the tribal situations, rather than looking in a very homogeneous manner, probably we have to really look at what are these different kind of the context, and within the differences, probably we have to build a kind of what is really commonality. And when you take the commonality, we also really find out that what is the other commonalities that we face with other deprived sections of the society, like maybe Dalits and the others, minorities and so on and so forth. So I think there is a need for us a little to have more nuanced understanding of what exactly is our problem in different parts of the country, and what is the framework which has really been given rise to, at the same time see as to what are really commonalities which we serve the basis of which we can build a larger alliance. And then also you find that the commonality that we find as being a tribals or being an Adivasis, and let's say other parts, other social groups, what is the commonality that is there? And I think that is how we think we can really build an alliance. And I think the most important questions, therefore, is look at what is really pushing us. And if you look at the last 10 years, I think I was looking at tribal situations, impoverishment has gone high. Even people working, work participation rate has really gone, what is called down, really high, down. So you find people don't have job. You look at everything that has happened. What's called even the Land Acquisition Act of 2013, how you find that government was trying to mellow it down, taking away the various kinds of things. So you find that there is always an attempt to look at that any law which has been a protective mechanism as to how that can really be in a way tampered, how can really be diluted, and thereby you make it more effective. So today you find that ease of doing business is so important. So ease of doing business is then what you find. Therefore legal framework and those which are constraining, you just try to do away with it. And that's what has been happening today. And therefore comfortably you can do. If you really look at, for example, the land cannot really pass through tribals, no tribals, but how is it going to the corporates? But they have found out a role, in a sense, the public-private partnership. So you have when the state government is entering, so naturally that's a legal entity and the state can really take the land, but then you have, they play second fiddle. but the corporates become more important. So you find that law that is there, which is protective, in fact, as to how that is really then being manipulated and in the sense being used, and we are unable to understand, unable to articulate, and unable to find a way out as to how we really tackle all these issues. So, in short, what I'm trying to say, I think as students, I think if you really want to understand tribal issues, I think the legal and constitutional issues are very important for us to understand, and look at the legal issues which are impacting and the legal issues which are protecting, and look at the kind of exchange that are constantly happening between these. And I always feel that all these laws that are coming, it comes in the name of what is public good. What is public good? In the larger segment of the people, but within the larger segment of people, Adivasis never been a part of it. So this whole idea of doing a business or what's called development projects in the name of public good at the cost of the people, are the Adivasis really a part of the public good? So all throughout, if you look at 75 years, the name of public good, but they have not really benefited out of this public good. So I think there is there's a hierarchy of law. There's a certain kinds of laws which you say invoke it because you think it has a dimensions of development, dimensions of growth, dimensions of public good. But in that dimensions of development, growth, and public good, there are some people who are not really part of that public good, and that really happens to be the Adivasis, particularly as I say, the peninsular India. Thank you very much.